The Lord be with you. Welcome back to another stage in our journey through the stained glass windows at Zion Covenant Church. Just a reminder that stained glass is an art form. It is a way to visually tell the macro story of the Bible, even while at the heart of the sanctuary, the oral word is preached, the written word is read, and people struggle in their prophetic imaginations to deal with what the text is saying. The windows and the artwork along the outside, the borders of the sanctuary, help reinforce, support, and supplement, draw out the biblical text for us in our imaginations and in our spirits. So we have slowly been working our way around the sanctuary, beginning in that northwest corner with the first window, which was about God giving birth, allowing the cosmos to be born. He made all things good. He made all things with structure and order and beauty. And that was his intention behind creation. The second window reminds us that humanity is the servant of creation. We are the ones who are made in the image and likeness of God. From the one human being comes two, and that is how God defines humanity, male and female. Both are made in the image of God. The woman is taken out of the man, and together they are the caretakers and the stewards of creation. By the time we get to the third window, there is this sort of answer to why things are not like that garden paradise anymore, primarily because of the work of the serpent. That voice of temptation crept in, and humanity no longer listened to the command, the word, the life-giving relationship with God, and instead we listened to a lie, and we chose to go the opposite way of God. We ate that forbidden fruit that we were told not to eat, and because of that, we were expelled and exiled from the garden presence of God. Which then leads us to the new question. How is humanity going to continue outside of God's presence, outside of God's blessing, outside of our relationship with God? And our fourth window leads us into this idea of God binding himself to humanity. So as we have said, there's always kind of a key verse that goes with each of the stained glass windows. For the fourth window, it is from Genesis 9:9, where God says, "Behold, I establish my covenant with you." And that is exactly what this window is about. God committing to humanity that he is going to continue in relationship through this unbreakable and binding covenant oath formula. Now, what's interesting in the actual biblical narrative is there is a considerable amount that happens between Adam and Eve being expelled from the garden and the actual flood of Noah. Details about their children, about Cain and Abel, about Seth and his line calling upon the name of the Lord, while Cain and his line try to make a name for themselves and start developing culture. What's also interesting is the artwork in the window doesn't depict the major thrust of the Noah story, which is the flood and the judgment. Out of chapters 6 through 9, roughly 6 through 8 are those details about the flood and the destruction. Instead, the verse and the visual jump to chapter 9, which is the conclusion of the flood. So in the picture, you do see waters on the The left side are sort of the still waters, and on the right side are the slightly more turbulent waters. But then you're given the image of the ark on that right side, floating comfortably above the waters. You're given the image of the rainbow, sort of over the ark and even emanating from the ark. That is the sign of peace that God gives as a covenant to Noah and his descendants, as well as all creatures. A covenant sign in the sky so that it's between heaven and earth. It is for God and for all of creation to remind them that God has bound himself to not destroy the earth by a flood again. And then sort of the predominant image, the lower half, is of the altar of thanksgiving. So we're told in chapter 9, or maybe it's the conclusion of chapter 8, that when Noah got off of the ark, one of the first things he did was took from the clean animals and he offered sacrifices to God, sacrifices of thanksgiving. And we're told that the aroma went up to God and was pleasing in his nostrils and stirred him in his heart so that he committed himself to allow the earth to endure and promised himself that he was never going to destroy it by floodwaters again. So that predominant image is the altar with flames coming off and the smoke rising up. And interestingly enough, underneath the altar, we start to see the greenery and the vegetation beginning to come back again. All of these images give us this ongoing conclusion that God is pleased with humanity now, that God is going to journey with us to something better, not just a destructive end, an end of wrath and indignation, but instead a hopeful end where humanity can somehow come back into relationship with God again, not just to not be destroyed, but to continue to develop, walking with God and communing with God. So that gets us past the first judgment to the first covenant. And we know that there are more things to come, ways that God is going to further develop his relationship with humanity, picking a particular ethnic group in humanity to represent him among all of the nations in the world. To find out how that's going to happen, we'll have to wait until the next stained glass window. So until then, in these days of ongoing pandemic, may the peace of God be with you.